Today we sit down with Zoya, a passionate advocate for women in tech and someone who has been building a startup ecosystem for Serbia for years, developing startup hubs, as well as the first regional pre-acceleration program that was first one in Europe to be chosen to be supported by Google for startups. She's also very eager to get more women and girls into the STEM careers. We'll be talking about entrepreneurship and startups, how she started her journey, and what is the status of women in tech. Zoya, welcome, and thank you for accepting this invite.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to support everything that you're doing.
Thank you. So you were building startups where many people here didn't even know what the word meant and how does it actually look like. What inspired you to actually start in that area?
The inspiration came from, so we're talking about, I think it was more than 10 years ago now, more than a decade. I feel very old now, but definitely more than a decade. And even then, when you look at the tech ecosystem and the people who were working in tech, they had pretty good salaries and quite a decent living, but there were no startups. And when you start engaging into what's happening in the tech community, because we were part of it, we started wondering what are the options. Where can you go from the tech? Are you a freelancer? Or so the next level is you're offering some services as a team, so then you can charge more and have more added value. But then the largest value add is actually if you have a product, and that's what a scalable product is, what a startup is. And then we tried to push, because we saw that future, that if you have a scalable product, you can actually sell it from any part of the world, so why not from Serbia? And we believe that in the tech ecosystem, at the time, the engineers, they had already a decent living, good salaries, they could find a new job very quickly, so we thought that they are a really good target audience to sell them the story of entrepreneurship. And why the whole entrepreneurship? Because that's what I think is what's shaping the world and what makes a difference and what can help a certain country skip several levels. It's one thing, so if you're building a product, you're not hiring just engineers like most of the time you're doing as a service company, but you're hiring designers, business development people, sales people, marketing people. If that product is from a certain domain, if it's an agri-tech product, then you are also hiring people from the agri sector, or if it's a fintech, from financial sector. So you're basically bringing in more people into the tech ecosystem, and that's why I think startups should always be the priority, and that every tech ecosystem should aim to have more startups, because in the end, if you're shooting, as they say, for the moon, at least you'll hit the stars, even if the astronomical part of the audience would think I'm talking wrong. But I think, like, if you're aiming to build a startup, it will be what you get is some people trying to build startups, failing, then trying to build another business, and that business can sometimes be a service, it can be another startup, it can be some completely different business, but then you will have startups and you will have everything beneath. And if we are just growing to have freelancers or service-oriented businesses, then we are skipping the whole, the most fruitful part of the ecosystem.
And a decade later, how does the ecosystem look like, actually?
That's also a good question, because I think it looks much better. And I always, whenever we are in, some time ago, I was often invited to a panel where we discuss the regional startup ecosystem and what's happening. And often in these chairs with me are people who are talking and complaining about a lot of stuff, which I completely agree. So we can complain about a lot. But then, as I said, as somebody who's been in the ecosystem for more than a decade, I have to say the amount of progress we've made is really huge. So if, for example, you said that people didn't even know what a startup is. The organization I was a co-founder on at that time, it was called Start It. And I remember, so we are talking about 2013, 2014, that people would mix what a start-it is and what startup is. So I would get announced, for example, to speak at a business conference, and somebody would say, so they are found, she will be talking about how to start a start-it. So people really didn't know what a word startup meant. So in that sense, where we are now, I think a lot of, especially young people, are talking about startups. Business people from corporate sector, even from mid-sized enterprises, are understanding that there is some startup ecosystem and that people are building cool stuff. So I would say that the progress is absolutely there. I read somewhere now that if we look at Serbia, there are 400 startups at every moment in Serbia, which I think is quite an okay number. Also, if we compare ourselves to, let's say, Western Balkans, I recently did some research, especially on that, where we are as a region and what's happening in that regard. And I think Serbia is really ahead if you look at everyone else in terms of the number of startups, even now, the available funding. And what's most important, I would say, not just available funding as a total amount, but I think that in Serbia something interesting happened, that we have a lot of smaller VC funds rather than one large one that happens, which I think is good for the ecosystem, because we have this competition among investors, not just among startups. So in that regard, I would say that Serbia in particular, but also the entire region, is moving when it comes to the startup ecosystem development. What's still lagging, I have to say, is we are still too slow. Mm-hmm. And when I say too slow, I often say that startups are too slow. There is this there's this lack of urgency in the approach. So I think that's something that we have to work on. And maybe what I would like to see more, which I still don't, is more people who are not from the tech sector taking active participation in the startup ecosystem. And I think the reason for it is on both sides. So first of all, the tech people, they have this tendency to trust only people who already are in the tech sector. So that's something. And on the other hand, I think that people from a lot of other professions, like we mentioned, marketing, business, but also then I am talking about this domain expertise, where in every field there are tech innovations now, and tech is reshaping every field. I think they are also afraid to get into the tech. So I would like to see more of that merge, which I hope will improve in time.
What do you think are the main reasons for that fear? Is that not being understood by tech people, failing, or something else?
That's a good and hard question. I think that fear is the fear of unknown, because whenever you start learning about something, there is this curve, at some point you're like, oh my god, I'm understanding this goes really well, and then when you get to a certain point, which is not too high, then you start dropping. And I think this is when it comes to tech, people who are outside of the tech field, they have this moment, oh, I feel like I understand it now, I get it, and then when they try to move later on, they get into this depth. That's probably when they meet tech people. So you're like, okay, I now know what ChatGPT are, and we are already in this new and we are already talking about we've passed the new Chinese ChatGPT, but we're now talking about the French one. So it's hard, and you feel like, oh my god, I invested this much time, I'll already Google, and it's not good enough. So I think that part of it is this fear of getting into something new, and maybe also I think as region, we are not that open to the concept of whole life learning. Mm-hmm. I think it's this thing that I remember, like when I was in high school, and at that time I wanted to start learning Spanish. And I even started, but I remember I was thinking like, wow, but it's too late to start a new language. And I think we are trained in that way to think like, now I should have done it sooner. Now I can't. So we see it often with people. I think it's very common in marketing, because you can see a very distinct professions and careers of people who've embraced digital marketing, and not just social media, but also going into this deep analytics part of marketing. And then you have this other side that stayed on this traditional marketing channels, traditional marketing. And I think there you can see this gap where people on this side, on the traditional side, they feel like it's too late for them to cross and to get, and I don't think it's too late. Look, I always say that my father, he is a professional artistic photographer, and at that time they were working, doing photographs in labs. So he had to know a lot about chemistry to do special effects if he wants to implement them. And then 15 years ago, he learned Photoshop. He had a tutor, a much younger photographer, who helped him get the skills. And at that time, he was 55, and or maybe 50, but he still now talks about photographers who've never still learned Photoshop. And if I look at him now, he knows Photoshop, and he knows it for more than 15 years already, although he started learning it when he was 55, but he's using it for almost 15 years. So when I think about somebody who is like me, in their 30s or in their 40s, to think that it's too late for something, I think they are definitely wrong. I think it's never too late to start something.
You mentioned going into something unknown, startups. We established very unknown a decade ago. But also I would like us to kind of discuss the full picture from your personal experience. You are going into unknown area of entrepreneurship in tech, startups, but also you are one of the pioneers plus female pioneers in this area in the whole region. How was that experience for you? What positives and negatives have you faced, and how did it shape your path moving forward?
I think first that I have to say is I was very young, and that helped. Because I think when you are young, at least when I was young, I couldn't envision all the challenges. I just had this vision where I think we should go, and this crazy belief that we can make it and get there. And I think most of the work at that time we actually did. I remember with my co-founders from Start It, I think, actually I remember the first time so we were doing stuff, conferences, events. We even opened up a small startup hub in the city center, but none of us co-founders was full-time dedicated to this. We had, I think, 1 or 2 employees. But we weren't full-time on it because we earned higher salaries in our jobs. And then it took us for several months to see whether we are ready to go all in and try to build it into something bigger. And I remember when I said it to one of my mentors, who is not a Serbian. He's from US, but he's been living in Serbia at that time for quite a while. And I was telling him that I've decided to quit my job and to fully dedicate myself to Start It, to building startup ecosystems, working with tech community. And I remember that he really sort of laughed at my face. He was like, wait, how are you going to earn for your living? It's not like this is not going to work in Serbia. There is almost no startup ecosystem. You shouldn't go all into that. Yeah, that's not good for your career. And now when somebody would tell me that, I think I would really back down or question it. But at that time, I was like, no, we're doing it. You don't get it. We are getting it. I'm really reminded of myself at that time now when I look at everything that's happening with students movement in Serbia. I really miss that feeling of confidence, of believing in your own power and that you can change the world, because I think that's how you change the world, as we can also see. But back to your question, at that time there were, when we started working full time, there were among us co-founders, there were the two of us women and two men. And I didn't notice any differences at the time. As I said, I was young, and the data also says that you start noticing differences a bit later. But we really worked. I think also my co-founders were really. They never made it. They never had some weird comments or tried to align things differently, or I never felt it that way. But I remember this is one interesting thing. Like, Started at that time was beginning to be very visible and relevant player in the regional ecosystem, and we started getting invites to talk at some events, to participate in certain panels, and those were mostly tech-related events, and I think every second invite specifically requested for me, because I was a woman, and that was interesting. It was an interesting experience because people wanted a woman, so they wouldn't have an all-men panel or all-men event. But I never thought about it. I didn't look at it as a threat or that somebody's putting me in a box. I always did like, okay, I think at that time I even thought, well, that's good. At least they are thinking about it. And unfortunately, there weren't many tech companies and tech organizations that had women in senior roles, or those women weren't that visible as I was at the time. So I always said yes to those invites. And I think that was really a good thing, because it helped me, build my confidence about talking publicly, my visibility. I met a lot of great people through that. But when I go back, I think I was maybe also somebody else would react differently, or maybe that would not be good for their confidence. And the only reason you are invited is because you are a woman, and not because you are good or that you are a good speaker or something. But I went with the flow, and I think it turned out quite well. And I think in those situations that sometimes you have to go with the flow and just. I think that not at every time, every battle at every moment has to be fight. So, for example, but did we have some situations? Of course we did. I remember also at that point we had 30 employees, and one of them, he was 7 years younger than I was, and I took him with me to a meeting with some new potential partners, and we sat at the meeting, we started talking, and at some point I noticed that they think that he's the boss. They didn't know anything, and they thought he's the boss. And he was 7 years younger than me, but he was a man. And those things happened several times, not just with that employee, but that was the first time I actually saw it. So those were the situations. And later on, there were some other within the tech sector, but we can talk about it later. But but in that time of building an organization and doing something completely new and trying to figure out the business model, how are we going to pay the salaries? How are we going to pay ourselves and then other people? And how many people are we going to hire? And how many hubs are we going to build? And what are we going to do? It felt just new. So new that I didn't had the time to think about any things that are my characteristics that might have anything to do with what we are going through, like not just am I a woman, or I didn't even think of whether I was also the youngest in our co-founding group. But that didn't even strike me. Like, we were moving too fast, and you just don't have time to look at the things that you just go and run and do your things. So sometimes it's also good, to be so occupied with real life problems and things that you don't have time to be in your head and start questioning yourself and doubting yourself. But I still think when I go back, I remember in 2018 I left, I exited, and I remember when I was making that decision, it was really hard, because in my head everybody knew me as Zoya started, and then I was thinking, are people going to pick up the phone now when I'm calling them? How is that even going to look? What am I going to do? The expectations are so high, and those things. But I remember this one feeling that I felt we did so much that no matter what happens with the organization after that, it played such a huge role in building the startup ecosystem in Serbia and in the region at that time, that I thought, like, this is a good legacy to have. And I still think of it that way. I think for me it was I think I couldn't even envision what we will do with it, how many people would support us, how many people would believe in our crazy vision that Serbia should be a startup hub. And I'm so glad that so many people joined in the mission, and that now when you look at the region overall, you see so many organizations who are active in this field and doing great work, and also so many donors and institutions and even governments. Now you can see, I think almost every government in the region is investing and in some ways supporting the tech scene, the startup ecosystem. When we were starting out, nobody did it. Like, it was, I remember we got several, like, really, really small grants and donations from some institutions, like the German GIZ, but really, really small things that you can't actually be on a full-time salary. But now I'm really glad to see that we did it when it was hard, and now I see so many people doing it with this same commitment, and so many people living this startup ecosystem life. For me, it was beyond imagination when we started.
When we were preparing for this podcast, you sent me a lot of information and data, and some of these things, like, for example, number of startups in Serbia, funding, etc. It's so impressive and heartwarming to see that you can be supported to start this journey.
Exactly.
There are even some would say bureaucratic, but very good measures about the position of women in a startup, how much are they funded, etc. But then we flip a coin, and you sent me an information that kind of, I needed to sit down and really take it in, and that is that female-only teams got 2% of VC funding, and 77% went to
all men
teams. Are there big differences in how we approach female founders, especially in tech and STEM fields, by society, startup ecosystem, VC funds, and what are some of your key takeaways?
Well, I'm always like, it's clear what the data says. But we should also be very careful when interpreting these data, because I think tech ecosystem on its own is very male dominant. Women are 25% of any tech industry at best. And I think we in Serbia and the region generally are very lucky, because we have higher percentage of women in tech fields and even in engineering roles than EU average, US average, world average. But to go back to your question, so why should we be? So we already have more men than women. And also, when you look at the global statistics about entrepreneurship, we have much lower number of women entering entrepreneurship than men. So when you look at it, how many people are founding startups, you have much smaller number of women doing it, especially all women teams. So I think there is this small number of all women teams, so that's why this amount is low. But I think it's still something that we need to work on. On the other hand, there are several research that I really loved that talks about where the VC money is actually going. And one is, so let's stay first on the topic of women, and then I'll tell you the other also example which is relevant for our region. So one is, it goes when investors, when somebody is pitching publicly their startup and you have investors asking questions. One Harvard study did, I think they listened to 700 pitches and then a lot of VC questions related to those 700 pitches, and they came to this conclusion that the questions women get and men get are different. And they said, like, men get opportunity questions. And opportunity questions are, how big will your revenue be in 5 years? How big is this opportunity? How are you going to get to this new market? And women get threat questions. How are you going to win with this big competitor?
I got the same one.
Yeah. How are you going to build this when your team is lacking these skills? So the question they are asking is immediately pointing out your problem and your weakness, and so the answer is different. So when you ask an opportunity question, no matter is it a man or a woman, they start talking, they see the vision, they get inspired. And when somebody asks you about how are you going to solve this problem, because I see you have this problem, you are talking about the problem. And you're talking about the solution, but you have to address the problem. And then the impression is different. So what did you say? You got this question?
Yeah, I remember the first pitch we did. I was the first one to be pitching, so even scarier.
Okay.
All of my questions were like, how do you see even this business model working? How do you see yourself compared to these things? And I remember one full male team, men pitching, and they were like, okay, how are you going to address more customers? How are you going to grab another country, etc.? And I sat there and I was like, of course I cannot talk about the vision if I'm only talking about the things that possibly cannot work out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where they put you. It seems like, I think it's a bias, the bias that exists in our society. I don't think people are aware of it, but it obviously exists. And there's also a lot of research done in terms of who is a VC, that those are mostly men, also mostly white men. So in some region, that's, let's say in the US, it's quite relevant. So when you're pitching a problem that's not a problem of a VC individual, like it's not a problem they've seen, it's not, for example, that much business related, it's not a man related problem, then they can't picture it and they can't build emotional ties with the product. And usually what the women build are products related to women, because that's where there's also this great product gap, for example, on various services for women. There was this great example when Apple built a health app and they didn't have any reproductive cycle. You couldn't put in any data about when your cycle was, which is one of the most important health data for every woman. So when you look at those gaps, so there's a lot of gaps when it comes to women needs and a lot of products that can emerge from that. But when you look at the VCs, they don't get it. They don't see it as a problem. They can't envision it. They don't know about it, so they don't want to fund it. And so it's a vicious circle, which we have to overcome. And the other thing that I said that I will mention later on what is the other thing, how are investors behaving, is proximity. And there is this, that most of the VC funds invest in companies which are close to their offices. And so basically there is this large circle, even to the neighboring area. Okay, some of those things are, why don't you open up an office to be close to me? But generally it's in that same city. This is something that, so in the more developed regions, there's more opportunity for to get an investment, to meet investors. In smaller regions, it's harder. But I've for some time I'm thinking about this outlier entrepreneurs, and I think as somebody who is for quite a long time in the startup ecosystem, in not the leading startup ecosystem in the world, and especially because I'm now working with in my new business, my two co-founders are women who were part of one of the North American startup ecosystems. I think that to start from this outlier position, whether you're a woman or whether you are from some other region which is not in proximity, or if you're from any other area which is making you an outlier entrepreneur, I think the tactic should be different. And also I always say it, in Serbia, top two subsectors when we talk about startup ecosystems are very telling for me. One is gaming industry and another one is blockchain. And why is that very telling for me? So gaming industry operates completely different than generally startups. So they rarely fund themselves through investments. They work with publishers, like in music or movie industry, where the publisher mostly takes a cut of your revenue, of the game revenue, a significant cut, but also takes charge of marketing. So that's something that we are not as a region good at. And I think when you build an interesting game and when you have good tech skills and engineers behind it, obviously it was easier to get a publisher than it's to get an investor. And the other thing, blockchain, also very atypical when you think about how it was financed, especially in the first, it's a very decentralized ecosystem that also at the beginning was connected to high engineering skills and knowledge, which we have in this region. But when you look at it, it's very interesting because it's not VC, those are not VC-enabled industries. The blockchain is just now becoming partly VC-enabled industry, but most of that is going on a completely parallel, different funding channels. And I think that's another great case to why I think we should think about this outlier, that not all methodologies of starting the business are applicable if you're in Serbia, and if you're in San Francisco, you can't copy it when you're in Serbia. Not all of them. Some of them you can. Most of them are relevant, but not all of them. And I think this is a special area that I'd like to go more into exploring. What are those differences?
You already mentioned that we have much larger contribution when it comes to ICT students in Serbia compared to European Union, to United States. You also sent me this data that says that women make 59% of graduates, but only 44% of employees, and less than % highest salaries. But you also educated me a lot about the STEM field and the percentage of women in Serbia accounting for almost half of the employees in STEM, 48%. Can you kind of paint a picture a little bit about locally and globally where are women in STEM fields?
So I always say that I make like a very big whenever we start talking about women in STEM, for me it's very important to point out that not all problems in STEM are equal when it comes to gender. So in most of these areas, especially in our region, we don't have the problem of women entering STEM. So if you look biology, medicine, chemistry, at some of these areas you even have majority of female students. Unlike tech. So in our region, even which is I remember when I was in the US, they talk a lot about women in civil engineering. And I was very confused because we don't have that problem. In our region, number of women in civil engineering is almost men and women, it's almost 50-50. And in the US, it's 5% women. So in most of the STEM fields in our region, but also even globally, women are at the university level, but not in tech. In tech, we have even this entry gap. So what is the problem in these other areas when you get to this, let's call them under one bucket, science, or science, engineering, even math. In math also we have, I think, also almost 50-50 here. But when you science, engineering, and math, you have this glass ceiling for women. So what happens? Women end up in less paying jobs, less paid positions, so they don't get to advance. So, for example, they graduate in math and they go to school to teach math, while men go to some fund where they, or in some other capitalism driven environment. Also, often even when they go to, let's say, further university degrees, you even have more women in those areas also obtaining doctorate degrees. But then when they climb higher, there is less women who are deans at universities, even vice deans, or a lower number of women who are obtaining certain relevant positions that come with their expertise or academic roles, like sitting in certain advisory boards or committees or different kinds of things. So that's where the gap starts showing as you climb the ladder. And in tech, the gap starts straight away, as they are born, I would say. And when you get into this university level, it's already global average is, I would say, is 22% women, 78% men. In Serbia, I recently looked at the data, for example, for the Faculty of Electrical Engineering, where we have most of the tech graduates. Now it's even, I think it's 33% of women and 67. So it's 1/3 to 2/3, which is much better than 1/4. But it's still 2 versus 1. And so this tech problem, I think it requires different approach. Because it's not enough. So what I see companies doing and a lot of organizations, they are mostly focused on how to help women who are already in tech, which I think is very important. But it's much harder to do when you are already a minority, because then it's you have to constantly remind the system to think about the minority. And I think in smaller teams, it's almost impossible. So if you have, which is very often that you have a team of 10 where only 1 or 2 are women. And in those teams, you don't have people who, it's either, it's a personal trait. So you are, the leader is either taking care of each individual or they don't. But it's not something that can be delegated to them, especially if there's small companies of that 10 people are the whole team. So I think that the way we need to tackle tech is by starting them when they are young, when girls and boys are young, and all these other fields we should at some, this university level start taking care of why are women opting out, why are they choosing slower career paths, what's happening there, and solve those issues. And in tech, we need to solve them even before they enter the university level.
I know how important for you the topic of basically youth and education about these fields, but I first need to ask another difficult question.
Ask.
And that is, what are the main reasons for that glass ceiling? Is that a systematic thing? Is that, again, a lack of education when it comes to leadership and approach? Is that maybe even a little bit lack of bureaucracy? Hey, we need to have, these levels of salary bands, etc.
So there is no simple answer. It's a hard question, but the answer is very simple. It's a lot of things. So on one hand, I always say that it's really hard to talk about equality at work. I'm sorry, if we don't talk about equality at home. And the reason is that we are not we are not operating in vacuum. People are not going to work and they are only in their work roles, and then they go home and then they're in their home roles. It's like a mix of things. So what the data shows when it comes to this gender gap, the gender gap increases mostly with motherhood. So we see this, and there is, for me, it was shocking that women, when we talk about the pay gap, that women, for every child a woman has, the pay gap drops for additional 5%. So if there's a mom of 3, she probably has 15%, she earns 15% more or less than I, who has a child, than, for example, you that don't have kids, and me 10%, her gap is 10% larger than mine who have one kid. And for me, that was really shocking. But as a mom, I completely get it. Because at home, no matter how much you try to build an equal level partnership, you have to try hard to do it, because the society is not built that way. So usually if you don't discuss it, if you don't have a conversation with your partner, if you're not dedicated to trying to equalize it, you will fall into this traditional norm, which is mom is in charge for the pickups of the kids, mom is in charge, mom is staying home when the kid is sick, mom is the default go-to parent. And that's just what happens. So I remember also, I'm now mentioning the US, but I was there in one of the, I remember I was there at one lean-in circle in one large multinational company. And so the corporate heads are talking how they are empowering women, they're enabling them with so many opportunities to network, to educate themselves additionally and things. But all those programs are on top of their work. So it's an addition to the work they already do. And if you look at a mom, she has so many other things to do when she finishes with her work for which she's paid, that it's really hard to organize her time. It's much harder to organize her time to learn more, or to network, or to go to the conferences and give lectures. It's much harder than it is for a man who can, somehow we as a society accept it less, and then there's this mom guilt and everything that happens. So I always talk that this talk is much more complicated than just the work talk. But let's go back to work. So also, when it comes to work, I think most of those biases are unconscious biases. And also, we are not machines. People are not machines. So, for example, I know this for a fact. A lot of companies from all sectors, including tech, they have these team building activities which include playing soccer. Women don't play soccer. some of them do, but even those who do, they don't play soccer on team, on like slots with men's. So you have this activity where people are bonding and building relationships and going to beer afterwards and having this some activities together which are outside of work, and in those activities you are also bonding through work as well. They help you solve some problems, you build a relationship which then can help you cross some challenge. And then also when it comes to talk about who's going to on a certain business trip, who's going to go, who are you going to recommend for a promotion or to go on this special, to get on this special opportunity, the first person who crosses your mind is somebody who is close to you.
Exactly.
And those are the things that make things harder. Also, this networking is a very large topic. I think every conference and event is struggling with bringing on women. Even if you look at the Web Summit, the regular ticket for a Web Summit is, I don't know, a lot. And then for women, you can get it for 2 tickets for 150 euros because they want to incentivize women to attend the events because there's not many of them. And why? It's just harder, especially again for moms, to organize their time to be on a conference, to be at an event which is after hours, because they are the default caretaker. And then even later on, it was interesting that you think like, okay, at least when the kids grow up it's easier, but no, then even at the later stages of careers, which you and I don't yet think about, but then you are the default person to take care of parents and other family members who are sick. So it's something that's happening, and it's happening on top of your work. So either what women have to choose is in some way, sometimes they don't even have a choice because there's only a certain amount of hours you have in a day. But when you are prioritizing your sleep, your health, between your career and your family, and it's and then this whole when you don't make a priority and don't make a priority on your own, then the society makes a priority for you, and that's something that's happening also in work-related situations.
And you perfectly described kind of between the lines that mental load that you have, because besides the priority as in, hey, I don't have time, I cannot take that guilt that you mentioned, it's like mom guilt, work guilt, I didn't visit my family, I didn't call them, etc. So
I think that's something that we as women really need to work hard to overcome, and that's something that we need to work on our own, because some of those things are something that we are taught how to think about, but it's still in our head. So we need to bring some new tools in our mind so that we can tackle it, because I think that's a great thing to stop, that's stopping us,
I read a study that showed that girls lose a tendency and interest basically in STEM between the ages of 11 to 12. Please correct me if that's wrong. And you highlighted also that technology has that gap at the beginning. I would like to open up with a education basically question, and that is where the education goes wrong when it comes to STEM and specifically technology when it comes to communicating to girls.
Okay, so now we are entering the field that I'm very passionate about. One of my passion projects is dedicated to bringing technology closer to young girls. And yes, so girls do lose interest, and some of the data says that it's even starting the age of 6. And then as we progress further, that's when it keeps on dropping. So for me, it was interesting that even girls who have chosen coding and programming, if you look at the US schools or even some European schools which have these uh, where you can choose subjects in later classes later. Yeah. That at that point you can even those who choose coding, programming, math, once they finish, they opt out to a university to do something completely different. So you have even drop there. But the first drop actually starts very early on, and where the education system, what the education system is doing wrong, I think it keeps on fostering this same narrative. And when I say fostering this narrative, I think that the way we teach kids about tech is very boys focused. So what do I mean by that? Like, we will teach you about robotics on the example of a car. And I'm not saying women and men, I think men and women drive cars, but girls rarely play with cars. And boys, they love playing with cars. And I think that's a huge difference in, that's like scientific, that when you want to learn something new, the best way to learn it is by connecting it to something that you already like. So for boys, they see a car, they already like the car, they know how to play with cars. It's this positive association with them. So it brings emotions for them to learn about the robotics and how this car moves and what's happening. And with the girls, the first thing they see, most of the girls are, and also here most of the boys, but it's, and most of the girls here, what is the first feeling they get? This is not for me. Because we've made, as a society, such a big difference between like the car, playing with cars is such a boyish thing to do. And then it immediately sends this signal, this is for boys. And then it moves on, like girls, they don't really play with cars, so they don't know how that play really goes, like what's interesting in it. I just learned what's interesting in it when I look at my kid now. Otherwise, I wouldn't know. And then, and so it continues. It's just one example, but also which examples you're giving kids. And I think that in the world of tech, technology is really changing every single thing we are doing. It's omnipresent in our lives, and I think it's really boring to constantly present it to kids in the same way that we do. So for example, let me give you an example. What we did, the first thing when I realized that part of this is the biases from parents, from teachers, and how are we portraying technology to kids, the first project that we offered to parents and so what we did in this passion project of mine, we are building do-it-yourself kits for kids to build some, but mostly for girls, or to build something that's interesting for them, and then in the meantime to learn about electronics. So the first thing we did is them creating light up cards. And we did, I remember we were testing it with some workshops before we made it into a product. And we were testing it with some workshops. And I remember one father, he came to me, he brought his girl who was, I think, 9 or 10, and he's a programmer. And when everything ended, and he came to me and said, I tried so many times to teach her something. I even Googled things. I found that we can make this card, but it never occurred to me that it should have all this glitter and all these stickers and that she should be drawing things on it. I just thought we'll print something that she likes, and then and it's this lack of understanding. So how we are trying to do things, I'm not saying like put a glitter on it and she'll like it, but we are just really trying to address this. Girls really like this to build things, like to craft they like crafts. And there was also an interesting interesting research done in Denmark, which showed that when girls are learning electronics by crafting and using glue or sewing things, that they are more eager to learn about the electronics than when they are using the screwdriver, exactly. And so we tried to let them do crafts and give them so many things they can use in this craft, so they can build something really their own. So they have pictures that they are choosing, then they have different stickers, then they have these colors, glitter, whatever. So they're making their own sticker, and in the end they're also making it, when you press a button, it lights up. So those all things that they're doing. So when they are doing this, pressing the button and it lights up, it's not a chore anymore. It's not like, oh, I'm now learning electronics. No, I'm not learning electronics. I'm learning how to make a greeting card. So we did it then. Another kit was a princess that is dancing, where they connected their first motor, for example. Or we had so many projects. Or bracelets that once you once you tie it, it starts shining. Once you untie it, it doesn't. So we're teaching them different stuff by doing things that they already like and that they associate with their interest. And I think this is not like, oh, now they will know so much about electronics. It's not about that. It's about they will know about electronics, but most importantly, they will know that electronics is something that can be so nicely connected with things they like. And this is something that I think current education system is failing to do. It's still in this how we taught this 50 years ago, when the curriculum was created by men who were at that time in that field.
I mean, the school classrooms look the same as they did hundreds of years ago.
Exactly.
You mentioned that, okay, from the operational side, you know what is the problem, you know statistics, and that kind of inspired you to address this problem of youth and young girls entering. But what was, of course, your personal motivation behind it, and what was your approach in that regard?
So I mentioned some of the issues, but I remember the first time I read a Lean In book from Sheryl Sandberg. For me, that was the first, let's say, feminism-related literature that I read. And I remember reading that book and then reading through some examples, which is she mentioning, which are data-based, and I'm like, oh my God, these are not my traits. These are my traits because I'm a woman. So for example, that I like to, I had this when I was at college, I had this, that I have to learn the exam fully before I go to the exam.
Yeah.
And if I read like 80% of the book, I'm not taking chances. I don't want to be that person. And I remember my father constantly telling me, but you might be lucky. I'm like, no, I don't want luck. I want to deserve it. And I was such a believer in this meritocracy. Like, if I do well, people will see it. I will get rewarded. Those types of things that I thought it's me. No, it's women thing. So it turns out that it's something that we as women tend to have, all of the meritocracy thing, the thing that I have to be on 100% of things, that I need to be prepared, that I can't go with the flow. Those are the things that are women traits, almost all of women, and are not related to men. And that's the moment where it hit me that I'm very similar to other women, and that we should stay together in this fight. Let's call it that way. Not in a fight, this is a wrong word, but that we should stick together. Because I think in previous generations, women tended also to fight among each other because there were so little spots available for women. So if you wanted to get on a board in some company, you knew that there can only be one woman in a board. There can't be two women in a board. It's like too much at that time, like we were talking 30, 40 years ago. So that was also natural. But I think now the more we stick together, the better we all are. And for me, so the moment I read the book, that's what changed my views. And there is this point that once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and then you start seeing it in so many situations. So I had one funny story. I was invited to this. It's not a funny story. It's just like a good example. I was invited to one American startup with large offices in Serbia. Had this brought in their investors to Serbia, and they had like a fancy dinner for the investors, for their key people, and they invited several people from the ecosystem to be at the dinner. And I came. It was like 15 people at the table, and I was the only woman. And I didn't even notice it, because that's something that has happened to me before. And I generally don't feel weird in those situations. The moment I started feeling weird is when we finished with the desserts, and we stood up from the tables and went into this like lounge area. We're drinking our cocktails, and suddenly 5 other girls appeared. Young girls looking similar to me, and I still didn't get it. And then one of the startup founders of the other startup that was also there as a guest came to me and said, "I feel so bad." And I was like, huh? And then I realized that those women were there to entertain the guests, and so I just left because I didn't want to be confused with one of them. But I remember that feeling like, wow, I'm now losing the opportunity to spend time with people, to network, just because they created. Or one other time, I remember one startup was getting acquired, and I was casually invited to celebrate with them. But then the person who was organizing the celebration said, "Yeah, but it's a strip bar." So those are some of the things like that happened, that I acknowledge, that I see. But I think it's just something that we have to accept, and then look for other opportunities where we can build relationships, meet people, and do stuff. And for me, I'm choosing now where I invest my time and how I invest it, and where I spend my time. So, for example, when I was younger, at some point I stopped going to parties after conferences, because I had more unpleasant networking things than pleasant. But I stay on the conference the whole day. I stay for daily activities, and that's something that I chose, and that I know also many other women chose. So those are the things that we have to acknowledge and live with it.
The example that you gave about you not going to exam before you're fully prepared, I see a lot of that when it comes to job applications. If women does not like fill out 95% of the things, she won't apply. While men,
yes, there
it's
is
like
this research.
English, I know that, rest of the things doesn't matter, I'll give it a try, which is very
there was this research also that whenever an ad is not precise in what they mean by a certain skill, women think it's a large. So if they say JavaScript, women think that it's an advanced skill of JavaScript, and men think it's they know some JavaScript, so it's okay. But women think, look, it must be that they are asking for somebody who knows JavaScript quite a lot, so that's not me. So if it's not specified, like in quantitative way where they can assess whether they fit in or not, women tend to think that that the requirements are higher. And in this, I know that about these job ads. I think the numbers are even lower in that research. 60% men apply to jobs when they fulfill 60% of criteria, and women when they fulfill only 100%. That's a huge difference. But for example, now in our new endeavor, which I have with Blanca and Alex, where we work with startups on helping them grow their revenue, it's interesting because it's three of us, three co-founders in a very male dominated space, but all three of us have been in this field for so long and have worked with both men and women that we don't even want to stress it that we are women. We don't even pay attention to it, whether we are a woman-only team or a man-only team, and who's and I think that there is this moment when it becomes just normal, and that we want to own it. Our colors, we have purple in our color scheme. We are running now this also knowledge sharing podcast where it's quite girly. You can see not like girly, but you can see that there was
atmosphere.
Yeah, by the atmosphere, and we just feel good about it because I think this time of where women were adjusting to male versions of worlds and what makes something look serious and what does not. I think that is changing, and I'm happy to embrace it.
As we are slowly approaching the end of our conversation, you have done several research independently with several organizations. You have participated in different fields, and you also have entrepreneurial endeavors. How do you measure success for these things where we are tracking the involvement of women, different stages? Is that only numbers, and should it be only numbers, or are we looking at some, other factors or indicators?
I think we've heard so many numbers, and I think everyone knows the numbers already. So what I try to do in the research I do is look at the story behind the numbers. So why is something happening? And we did. For me, that was really interesting. We did this qualitative study. It was done in cooperation with UNDP in Serbia. So there is a lot of data points on how many percentage of women are in tech, in which area. We even did some LinkedIn-based research, but then we chose, it was more than 40 women with whom we did interviews of different profiles, trying to figure out. So those were the women who were part of the tech field by education, who educated themselves in some different field but entered tech, who educated themselves in tech but are not in tech anymore. So we were trying to figure out what's happening, and I'm really proud of those results, because I think that those learnings are the things that we can now pinpoint and make a difference. And one learning was that no matter what they chose as, most of them, no matter what they chose as a field what they are going to study, most of them were great students, had all A's from all subjects, and were thinking whether they will go and study English, or they'll study math, or they study medicine. So they went through the entire circle because they were just good at all of the things, and most of the time not amazingly great at one single thing. And also exactly that, because girls are better students than men. They have higher grades. For me, that was interesting, that how they compare what is great, what makes me a good mathematician. It's not an A as a grade, but it's they measure it like how much better I am in math than I am in English. It's not like how much better am I in math than this guy in math, but it's I'm not excelling math compared to all things that I'm already doing good. So they decide, well, math and tech and engineering, those are for people who are really, really good at math. And I'm not really good at math, although I have an A. So few things from that can come out as action and changing things is this, that you don't have to be a genius to study anything related to tech. If you have an A, you're already awesome. and you are a genius probably, and you'll be great at this university. But also this other thing that how girls measure themselves, and what they do they allow themselves to be good at something and bad at something, or we are constantly pressuring ourselves to be good at everything, and then we don't have the time to figure out what we really like. So that was one takeaway, for example, that's very actionable, and you don't see it in the data. You see it only when you start talking to people. So that's why I think qualitative data are much more important. Also, another thing that came out that could be seen in data, but that data is not easily available, so we learned it through interviews, is women tend to stay, there is this data that women tend to stay longer in one company, so they're more loyal. And that could be also a relevant reason for the pay gap, because the biggest salary bumps come after you switch the company. But this is interesting. If a woman changes her first job within 3 years, she then changes every other quickly. So the woman then enters the male pattern.
Yeah.
But they tend to stay at this first job longer, and then it's harder for them to then leave, and then those are the things that are interesting. So then it can be another point, which whenever I talk to like high school students or women who are just in their careers, I always say, change your first job quickly.
I did that.
Awesome. So good for you.
And I can completely relate to that, both for the reasoning behind that. When you look at kind of even great companies that have this information very public, like this is kind of the threshold that you can achieve, it's always much smaller than if you change that job. And especially at the beginning, it is also connected to the opportunities for learning. The more you are there, the more they are like, but we gave you everything. No, you didn't. Probably you didn't. There is more opportunities.
But there is also this, like women, even when they are entering their first job, they usually get a lower salary unless there is this like very standardized entry point. And you can always hear from women, oh, I would get, I just want to come and learn. You don't have to pay me anything. You'll never, very rarely hear it from a man tech graduate. So those are the things. So when you start from a lower starting point, then it's even harder. So at least you don't have to change jobs if you really like the job you're at now, but at least do interviews just so you can measure and see where you are and where your salary is and how somebody regards you at what seniority level and what are the things people are offering you. That's another advice.
Lastly, what would be your advice for young girls or women at the start of their career, even who are entering these fields?
Okay, we just said it. So change your first job, or if you're really, really loving the job, do the interviews, and just so you can see where you are realistically. Another thing, be connected and build a community of other women, successful women. For me, it was really life-changing when I intentionally started building these allies and starting talking openly with other women who are in my field or near to my field or where we are at the some same level. The amount of support, the amount of empowerment, the connections that I got are really, really great. And even my co-founders now, Alex and Blanca, they are we met through one of those ways, like started, working, started, exchanging experiences, then grew into being friends, and now we are in this business together. So I think those are, you never know what can come up from great female support systems.
Thank you so much, Zoa, for this very insightful session. I know I have learned a lot, and probably all of our listeners. Thank you for following along. This episode was dedicated for all of the genius women in STEM.